History. A very, very long account of great battles, powerful people, their even more powerful cousins, bureaucrats and their bosses, accomplished soldiers and their generals. Oh yes, and a curiously small number of very powerful women. But what about ordinary people? Our next genius was just that, an ordinary man with an extraordinary talent to turn history on its head. This is a story of a CUNY graduate who became a MacArthur Fellow and his lifelong efforts to promote multiculturalism and perspectives of ordinary people in the study of American history. The problem is that historians have tended to spend too much of their time in the company of the movers and shakers, and too little in the universe of the mass of mankind. Lawrence Levine writes in the prologue of his Black Culture and Black Consciousness. It is 1977, and Larry has already spent most of his life fighting against traditionalist views. Growing up in the midst of the Great Depression, Larry developed a strong sense of history at a very early age. His parents spent hours listening to Fireside Chats, a series of evening radio addresses hosted by none other but the big man himself, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Think things through.
His parents' admiration for this important man only grew stronger after he signed the Declaration of War on December 8, 1941. America was at war, and Larry, still too young to join the fight, couldn't do much more than focus on helping his father operate his fruit store in Washington Heights. Ironically, it was here, thousands of miles from the conflict, where he witnessed something that had a lasting impact on his perception of history. Every morning while setting up his store, his father would gather ripe fruit that he couldn't sell the day before and share it with people in need. As they formed a line in front of the store, these ordinary men and women, each with their own unique story, would discuss world politics, analyze markets, and tell stories about heroes and villains who fought overseas. As he listened to their discussions, Larry started wondering, would anybody but him ever hear their stories? Is history going to remember them? The fact that his father's store offered a 10% discount to school teachers didn't help Larry achieve higher marks in school. A self-described screw-up in high school, Larry joined the ranks of City College in 1951. A rowdy political climate the college was known for at the time sounded like a good fit for his somewhat unconventional understanding of the human condition and discipline. Yet, before long, Larry started developing a completely new set of concerns, this time of a more intellectual nature. We studied Northern and Western Europe, he said in his interview for the New York Times in 1996. Nothing on Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Even Canada was a blank. This lack of historical perspective, common for curricula of the majority of universities at the time, had a major impact on Larry's career. If one of the most progressive educational institutions in the country taught very little about the majority of the people in the world, what was happening in the rest of the country? After graduating with a degree in history from City College in 1955 and getting his PhD from Columbia under the mentorship of the famed historian Richard Hofstadter, Larry briefly taught at City College in Princeton before receiving an offer from Berkeley. It was 1963 in California, and tensions were running high. Almost immediately upon arrival, Larry took part in civil rights sit-ins and in 1964 got involved with the free speech movement at Berkeley campus. Reminiscing about his experiences, he later stated, The Berkeley free speech movement coincided with the beginnings of that whole long period, that painful, interesting period of protests on the war, which kept everyone hopping. There was a lot of optimism in that period. We had a large group of fantastic undergraduates and graduates who were lively, dynamic, and maybe naive, but open to all kinds of things. Throughout the 1960s, he repeatedly witnessed patterns of social interaction that suggested that no system of traditional values could stand against the rising tide of change. In these new and unfamiliar surroundings, he also became increasingly aware of the underlying complexities of American culture and started shifting towards a more open model of historical research, one that would be able to encompass and address such complexities. Informed by his experiences with the civil rights movement, Larry started his research into African American protests of the 20th century. Over time, however, this project evolved into an in-depth investigation of African American folk traditions before and after emancipation. Contrary to traditional concepts which held that African culture in America disappeared quickly under slavery, Lawrence Levine proposed a new interpretation of the African American experience, a dynamic view of a cultural group that, through its rich oral traditions, simultaneously preserved the elements of its original culture, but also had a major role in defining and enriching what we commonly perceive as American culture. Published in 1977, Black Culture and Black Consciousness influenced a whole generation of historians and heralded a cultural turn in our perception of American history. In his book, Highbrow, Lowbrow, published in 1983, he explored our prejudices associated with the ideas of high art and popular culture.
Let me see.
By demonstrating that higher forms of culture, such as Shakespeare, symphonies, jazz, art museums, even a stroll through Central Park, all have their origins in popular culture, Lawrence asked us to take off the mask of pretense and accept the fact that Shakespeare wore an earring. In 1983, Lawrence received a MacArthur Grant. He was president of the Organization of American Historians and received a Guggenheim Fellowship in 1994. Yet, these accolades didn't come without criticism. Lawrence and his unconventional notions of history came under scrutiny for relativizing true American values. In response to Alan Bloom's The Closing of the American Mind, which critiqued modern American universities as disseminators of relativism and nihilism in American culture, Lawrence wrote The Opening of the American Mind, a positive vision of American education and society. In his prologue, he writes, "The contemporary university, with its eclectic faculties and student bodies, its rich array of courses and programs, its dedication to expanding students' understanding of the diverse cultures and societies that surround them, has been drawn into the cultural conflict that characterize our time. This, then, is a brief book about the opening of the American mind from the early 19th century until now. It is also a plea on behalf of the steadfastness needed to keep our minds open, the courage required to live with the complexities of a deeper understanding of our culture and ourselves, and the honesty vital to an encounter with, rather than escape from, history." In 2002, just 4 years before his death, Lawrence Levine published his last book, this time with his wife, author Cornelia Levine. The book, titled The People and the President, America's Conversation with FDR, contained hundreds of original letters written to President Roosevelt as a response to his policies, expressed in fireside chats. And although some of them expressed only the highest praise for the president's policies, while others contained hints of disappointment or even anger, one thing was certain: it was a history written by ordinary people.